Hello and welcome to Growing Cities podcast. I am Viviana, global real estate consultant and your host. Here at Growing Cities podcast, we bring together guests who envision a greater future for cities across the globe. Be a part of the movement. See what it takes to grow a city. I am delighted to have with us today a superstar of international urban planning and development, Pedro Ortiz. He currently is a senior consultant on metropolitan management and planning for international government organizations as the United Nations, European Union, UN Habitat, World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, and others. He consults as well for national and local governments, and he has been senior urban specialist at the World Bank for years. Welcome, Pedro.
Very happy to be with you.
Mm-hmm. Awesome to have you as a guest. Let's get started. What are the key elements for good urban planning in the 21st century?
Well, I rather talk about metropolitan planning than urban planning, because urban planning has been around for already almost a couple of centuries. Mm-hmm. And we know everything that has to be known on urban planning. The problem is that we are not implementing it. No? But urban planning is a discipline that has been for very long. And what we see now is that we are repeating the same things that we have heard 50 years ago or 80 years ago and so on. No? So there is really nothing much new in urban planning. But in metropolitan planning, that's a brand new phenomena around the world, a phenomena that has only taken place in the last 50 years, since Second World War. And let me say that in the history of mankind, there were only three cities that were 700,000, a million plus inhabitants, that were Rome of Julius Caesar, Beijing of the Ming Dynasty, and London of Queen Victoria. So we have gone from 3 to now that we have 500. So from 3 to 500, that's really a revolution. And we still don't have the discipline of metropolitan management and planning. And that's what we have to build. And that is what really is new in the world, not urban planning. We already know how to solve those problems. The problem is that we are not implementing those solutions. But for metropolitan planning, we really have to build up the discipline and the solutions. And that is really what's going on around the world.
I see. I saw a few of your presentations on the metropolitan discipline. Is this a method? Can you explain a little bit?
Well, it is rather an understanding of what metropolis are, which is completely different from cities, no? Mm-hmm. If a worm is 15 centimeters long, and you have something which is 1.5 meters, is not anymore a worm. It is a snake. And if you deal with the snake as you would deal with a worm, you're in trouble. And that is the problem that we are now confronting around the world, that people address metropolitan issues as if they were urban issues. And they apply urban solutions to something that is not applicable to. You cannot apply warm knowledge to a snake, And so that's a bit of a mess that we are producing all around. So the issue is that we have to build that discipline. And that's why I have been developing that for already 40 years. And that's what I can bring about to other academics, to other scholars, to other professionals, because this kind of thing is not produced in universities. This knowledge is an empirical knowledge that is produced by people that are confronted with the real issues of they have to address. And in universities, what they do is they take what others have written and they make sense of that under theories. But if there is not that first contact, that primary knowledge of what is going on, then the universities cannot find the framework for their analysis and their discipline. And that's what we are trying to do, to gather all those knowledge that has been built up as an empirical base by doing, and built out of that a kind of theory of how metropolis should be managed and planned, and building up the discipline. And that's what we are really actually doing. And very few people around the world are doing that. We are really 20 or 25 people around the world that are doing that.
Wow, so visionary. I work as an asset manager, and we do tackle the effects of what you're mentioning. Part of the portfolio I manage has a big component in affordable housing, and in New York, for sure, the scale is so large, and thankfully there are a lot of benefits and programs that aid the city. Right now, for example, after COVID, or during COVID still, we're dealing with a great deal of uncertainty. However, the government, I see them really standing up and offering these programs that are based on this knowledge that you're mentioning, where, really at a grand scale, it needs to be thought and how to mitigate all the issues that we have, especially in this large city of New York.
One of the problems we are addressing is that we are producing piecemeal policies, no? Mm-hmm. Because, for instance, housing is part of the physical realm of a metropolis, no? Mm-hmm. Housing is like productive activities, industries, commerce, and so on, and social facilities, hospitals and schools and so on. That is the land use, but you cannot forget about the environment, the green spaces, or the transport, the roads and the public transport. And all that is just part of the metropolis. That the architects, the guys that are used to deal with the physical realm, they think that that's the whole metropolis. But no, the metropolis is the economy, the sociology, the governance, and so on. And each of those areas is as complex as the physical one. So when you do something just in one area, in one policy, in one sector, in one element, and you do not realize the impacts, the ricochet, mm-hmm. that produces in the other elements, you're really producing effects that you don't know, and probably many of those effects are going to be negative and not just positive. So we have to realize that a metropolis is like a national government, the complexity of a national government, and you must realize all those gaps, when the ricochets of any policy on the other sectors. And you cannot be just focused on one policy. You have to understand the complexity of the metropolis.
You have worked so much in so many cities and have a truly educated viewpoint. What is the best example of effective urban planning in a metropolis and worldwide?
I think that the Northern European cities are the best managed right now, no? And best managed because they have been able to blend the quality of the environment, sustainability, with an equity policy, thinking about social justice, no, and all these subsidies for helping people to have a dignified life, plus efficiency. Obviously, Europe is not the most efficient areas in the world. We are saying that Europe is lagging behind in this world competition in economics and so on. But it's a blend of things, no? Is environmental sustainability, is social equity, is economic efficiency, and with an equilibrium in the governance, no? That the governance has to blend all these elements that most of them are conflictive. Social equity and economic efficiency generally are conflicting. The more efficient you are, the less equitable you are, and vice versa. No, so that blend in the Northern European metropolises like London, Stockholm, even Paris, no, that started to develop as a metropolis in the middle of the 19th century, they have been able to find that kind of blend of elements. No, in other places in America, you have mainly efficiency, but then you have the problem of social equity. And then long-term sustainability, no? You must really introduce beauty in a city for the pleasure of that emotional and cultural sustainability in the long term, no? And some of those have not. No?
Got it. Since you have done so much research about so many nations, are there patterns that repeat in metropolises across the globe?
Well, one of the patterns that we are now suffering the most is explosion. Many metropolises around the world are growing at a pace of 5% every year. And you must realize that if you grow by 5% every year, that means that in 14 years, you double your size. Doubling your size is like building a new metropolis like the one you have in 14 years. Imagine building Paris or London or New York in 14 years, no? And many metropolises around the world, in Africa, in Asia, and so on, are experiencing that. So that real explosion, imagine that happened in New York. That means that every day you have to build 10 blocks of New York every day, not just make the layout. No. You have to build them one block every 2 hours. No, and many metropolises around the world are confronting that kind of problem, and then they don't have the budget, they don't have the capacity to build it. So what we are growing is slums and really in a mess. And the politicians don't want to sit, because as they are not going to be able, they are not able to address it, then they say, well, it's not my problem, is for the next politician to come, it will be his problem in 4 years, 8 years, or 12 years, no, or 30 years, or 50 years. So they don't want to see the problem, they don't want to address it. And the most they do is they attack where those processes are visible. If people build in the places that are too visible, then they avoid that. But then that happens in the back doors, in the back places, no? And to give you another example, Guadalajara in Mexico, no? Guadalajara is growing by 7 hectares, 7 football fields every day. And Guadalajara is not a big metropolis. Well, it's 6 million inhabitants, no? And do you see that? No, you don't see that, because if you saw that, immediately the politicians will address the issue. But it happens where you don't see it, but it's happening. And that is the inheritance we are leaving for the next generation to solve. And in Europe, if I may, in Europe, we had that inheritance in the 19th century. The European metropolises started to grow, explode, with the Industrial Revolution in the middle of the 19th century. And for many years, the Europeans did not know what to do and did nothing. And we have inherited areas in the cities, in the old cities of Europe, in Madrid is an example, but you have that in London, Paris, and so on, which are really impossible to manage. And that's where we have the worst conditions of housing, of criminality, of all time of marginalization, social marginalization. So what we are doing right now around the world, we are producing those problems for the next century or for the next couple of centuries, because the problems of Europe started in the middle of the 19th century, and we are getting to the middle of the 21st century. So really, it is a 175 years old problem that is still there, and we are still suffering from those problems. So our generation is producing those problems for the next 3 or 4 generations into the future.
Wow, scary. I hope the new generation comes with a whole lot of motivation and energy to tackle that. And I hope I can be a part of a better built environment, more sustainable through affordable housing at the moment. I guess every contribution matters, right? I suppose this might be a case by case, but how is the ideal density of a metropolis measured in order for it to be sustainable? For example, New York.
Well, metropolises are not measured on density. That's more of an urban approach, no? Okay. We have in Europe a limit of density in many countries in Europe, which is around 80 dwellings per hectare. 80 dwellings per hectare in the actual European framework is something like 250 people per hectare. And if you apply that to a square kilometer, that will make 25,000 people by square kilometer. That is the top we accept in Europe. And we generally work with half that size in the new developments in Europe. But that doesn't work for the metropolis. That's for urban. Mm-hmm. Because a metropolis is different from cities, because a metropolis is a discontinuous polycentricity. Polycentricity because in a metropolis you have many urban centers, And what is a must in a metropolis is that those urban centers do not merge, no? And that is the problem with many metropolis. Each of those, they grow and they eat up all the interstitial green space. And at the end, you have an urban continuum that is impossible to manage and has a terrible environmental quality. So the issue of metropolis is discontinuous polycentricity, not disjointed, discontinuous, because they are jointed by the public transport system, mainly the train or the metro and so on. So they are not disjointed, but they are discontinuous. And in the middle of those urban centralities, urban centers, you have the rural and the green space that flows and makes the metropolis sustainable. So how do you apply density to that? There is no density measure to that because it all depends on the culture to which that metropolis belongs to. For instance, in the Po Valley, in the north of Italy, the distance between those centers is 3 kilometers, like in Havana, because the soil is very rich, and then there is a very good agriculture that has produced urban centers very close by. In Madrid is 4 kilometers and a half, 5 kilometers. In other places, 8 kilometers. In Buenos Aires is 15 kilometers. So you see, you cannot apply density to metropolis. It's not the factor that we have to deal with. You should apply in metropolis time to work. Time to work. And time to work in the metropolis of the world at work is around 30, 40 minutes, no? Sometimes it's even less, 20 minutes. You get to your job, the average time to work is 20 minutes. But the average in the metropolis at work that are well managed is 30 to 40 minutes. So once in Guatemala, I say that if you take more than 1 hour to get to your job, you should change your mayor, because obviously it means that the mayor does not know how to manage and to run the metropolis. And imagine in Bogota, where sometimes you take 3 hours to get to your job, what you should do.
That makes so much sense. As humankind, we have gone through so much with the current public health crisis. What are your views on the future post-COVID in these metropolises?
Well, America is very young, and you don't have the experience of pandemics as we do have in Europe, no? In Europe, the first big pandemic was, previously there had been previous pandemics, but the best record one was in the year 546. It was the Justinian pandemic, and even 1/3 of the population in Europe died. 1/3 of the population, if we apply that to actual numbers, that will be 200 million people dying in Europe alone. No? So really, that kind of pandemic was terrible, and we had pandemics every 80 years. Since Roman time, we have had almost every 80 years pandemic. Well, the result of that is that the cities have never changed. Why? Because people during the pandemic, the wealthy ones go away to their country houses, the less wealthy ones keep inside their palaces, and they pay the poor ones to do the nasty work, and now the ones who die. But once the pandemic is over, and you have the horde reaction to the virus, then when the pandemic is over, people want to go back to their previous life. They want to recuperate what they had lost. So they go back to their previous life, and there has been no change in European cities for 20 centuries due to pandemics. For instance, the last one, the big one in 1918, called the Spanish flu, but it was from Kansas. It was not even from Spain. But in the World War, First World War, 40 million people died. 40 million in the World War, and the pandemic was just after the World War. And in the pandemic, 50 million people, more people died in the pandemic than in the war. And the war changed completely the panorama of the world in economic terms, in political terms, in social terms. The world was absolutely changed after the First World War, and the pandemic produced nothing. The pandemic did not change anything. So people try to go back to their lives and to forget. And a human mind, a human brain is very good forgetting what doesn't want to remember. No? What I will suggest is that the COVID, this pandemic, what should teach us is to build cities in case of a new pandemic capable of compartmentalize, to make compartments of it. It's like in a submarine. In a submarine, when you have a problem of a leak in one of the compartments, you close down the submarine and you deal with the problem in that compartment, and you don't have the flood all over the submarine. And what we have seen in this pandemic is that the cities were not able to make compartments, and the COVID has a spread through nations, through metropolis, and so on. So we are not going to change the structure of the cities of metropolis because we are looking for maximizing the efficiency. And we're going to go back to that. But at least we should have some kind of protocol to be able to make compartments once a pandemic is starting, because that is the way to control the spread of it. And we have proven not to be able in this last pandemic, and we might learn from that, but nothing much else is going to change.
Very insightful. There is also currently an environmental crisis. We've all known about it. I feel that it connects with the public health crisis to a certain degree. Can you tell us if climate issues are linked to how we've been able to develop cities sustainably?
Well, climate change is really a very serious issue, no? And due to the way the world is governed, it was obvious that we were not going to be able to address climate change, no? Because the disjointed governance of the world with all the nations that are looking for their own interest and so on. So it was obvious that we were not going to be able to address the climate change. So what I wrote already 4 years ago, a piece of paper saying climate change, plan B, no? Plan B is, as we are not going to be able to change it, let's put the elements in place to address that issue that is going to come anyway, no? And that issue is going to come through mainly two elements, no? Sea level rise, and we are already thinking about 1 meter by the end of the century, and even more. I have professors in MIT that tell me that it's going to be more than 1 meter, no? And then obviously the temperature change inland, less rain and less rainfall and all that, no? Well, the less rainfall, we will have to adapt and to manage water in a better way. For instance, Spain, by the end of the century, is going to have 40% less rain than it actually has. And Spain is a very dry country, you know? So the problems are going to be that. But the other problem is the sea level rise. And you see, in the sea level rise, there is many side effects and many phenomena that people do not realize. Normally, the colonizing countries, their capital is in the center of the country because they control the country. But the colonized countries, the ones that have been colonized, the capital is generally by the seaside, especially in the second wave of colonization, which was the 19th century by the French and the English. Because the Spaniards, when they colonized Latin America, the climate was so humid and wet by the seaside that they had the tendency to produce the capitals high in the mountains. Mexico is 1,500 meters, Bogota is 2,800 meters, Quito, and so on, because Bogota has a very good climate. Apart from the fact that either it's raining or it's going to rain, Bogota is 20 degrees all year around, and it's very different to being in Barranquilla or in Cartagena and so on, where is the tropical climate and very hot. So apart from the Spaniards in Latin America, which is the first wave of colonization in the 16th and 17th century, the second wave, the 19th century, the French and the English put the capitals in the seaside, because the objective of that colonization was taking the raw materials to ship them to London or Paris to produce goods out of those raw materials. So the capitals are on the seaside. That means that with 1 meter increase, all these capitals are going to be very much affected. As we see, Jakarta now is almost underwater and has floods every year. And we have to address those floods, that sea level rise in all those capitals. That obviously is not by making walls of contention like Amsterdam, like in the Pays-Bas in Holland, but it has to be a really long-term solution, and we have not yet produced the right policies to address that issue in the right way. There are ways of doing that, and there are sometimes some hints that are given in the media about the good solutions, but we have not yet built up a whole vision in the long term on how to deal with sea level rise in all these capitals which are by the seaside, which are mainly the African ones and the Asian ones.
Wow. Good luck to all of us, right?
Wow.
I heard about this revolutionary method of metropolitan planning called Metro Matrix method. Were you a part of the team who developed it?
Yes, we were. It was in Madrid in 1995. Yes, 1995. And because Madrid was growing very fast at the time. Madrid is halfway between developed country and developing country, because you know that the development of Spain took place in the 1960s, no? In this century, not in the 19th century like Paris, London, or other European countries. So by the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, this second half of the 20th century, Madrid was exploding compared to London or to Paris, exploding. And we had to build up a system that will allocate all that explosion. And I was telling before that many metropolises around the world are growing at 5%. That means you double every 14 years. Madrid was only growing at 2.5%. So we only had 50% growth of Madrid in 20 years. And we were a developed economy. Our income was already in the not as high as France or Germany or England, but we were halfway. So we had the finance, the capacity of building the infrastructures, and we were experiencing that kind of phenomena of explosive growth, but not as much as in Africa and Asia. So we really had to build up a system that would be able to locate all that growth in a way that it will be sensible and sustainable and equitable and so on. And so we saw that along the history of the world, the system of growth of the cities has always been not circular at the very beginning of the cities, no? Even in architecture, the prehistoric architecture were huts that were circular. But when you grow, you change from a circular pattern to a reticular pattern, to a grid pattern, no? Because it's much more efficient. In a circle, all the spaces that are in between the circles are lost spaces, which are very valuable because they are centralities and so on. So you change from a circular to a reticular system in a natural way. And that has happened since the Romans, since the Greeks, since the Roman, since in other cultures like China, like the Aztecs and so on. So the reticular pattern and the response to this new phenomena of the metropolis of the 20th and 21st century was to change from a circular pattern to a reticular pattern, as we have done many times in the history of the world. And so the Madrid team decided to change the structure of Madrid from a circle to a reticular. And that helps. The phenomena is because all metropolises are so huge, so big, that they are not in a featureless plane. You are a metropolis because you are in a location that gives you an economic advantage or a military advantage or a political advantage and so on. So the location of the metropolis is always very relevant for the development of that city as a metropolis. And those locations are always related to some kind of geographical feature. You're in the seacoast, You are the easy crossing of a river, like Paris or London. You are the crossing of a mountains, like Cologne in Germany, and so on. And these geographical features are always linear. A coast is linear, a river is linear, a ridge of mountains is linear, and so on and so on. So metropolis have always a main directionality and a secondary alternative cross-directionality. And Madrid was like that. So we realized that the new size of Madrid required a new size of response to address that explosion of Madrid. And the Metro Matrix was born in Madrid in 1995, late 1995. It has been applied around the world, and I have worked in 68 countries around the world, and more than 100 metropolis around the world. And in the webpage, in my webpage, you can find the solutions of the Metro Matrix theory and paradigm of application to more than 100 metropolis around the world.
This is incredible work, and I encourage all of our listeners to visit your site. There's a whole world of information in there. Now, on a personal level, what motivated you to write your book, The Art of Shaping a Metropolis?
The motivation was that we had done that work in Madrid, and when I went to work for the World Bank, I realized that it was applicable to many metropolis around the world. As I just mentioned before, metropolis are not round naturally. They are linear and reticular in nature. You only have to read to be able to read that, no? And so I thought it was a useful experience for people to know and to share and to use. So that was my motivation, the experience of Madrid, to make them available to the 500 metropolis that need to address their metropolitan size, their metropolitan structure, which is absolutely not urban. It's a different approach that they have to take.
Interesting. The book is definitely on my list, and I love Madrid. It's a wonderful city. And now I know why. It's so great. Let's remember a little bit about your time as a Madrid government official. What was the most memorable thing about your time as a mayor of Distrito de Salamanca?
Well, I must say that my most memorable thing is my white hair. No, my hair became white in 1 year and a half. No. It was a terrible time. It is very difficult to be a politician. The mind of a politician is completely different from the mind of a professional, and we don't have time to discuss that. But fighting corruption was absolutely terrible. No? The structure of corruption in Spain, like in many countries, no, and some more and some less, but fighting corruption was terrible, and that's why my hair became white in a year and a half. No, that was the most terrible experience. But in terms of what I'm more proud of, what I was able to do in those 2 years that I was mayor in the center of Madrid, I increased the trees of the Barrio Salamanca, which is a consolidated urban. There is nothing new to be built. It's absolutely everything is built there, and so we have no way of making new parks and so on. So what I did is I planted trees in all the streets of the Barrio Salamanca. If you come to Madrid and you go to Goya or Serrano and so on, all those trees are mine, and I was able to increase the amount of trees in the Barrio Salamanca by 60%. So really that is part of that. And the second thing I would say was building underground parking lots, such a way of taking cars out to the street and be able to make the pedestrian ways larger and more beautiful as a city. So trees and pedestrian ways by putting the cars under the pavement. Yeah.
That's all stuff I love. Great work. It is fascinating, the territories you've been working on with the World Bank, the UN, and other IGOs. What has been like the experience consulting for these global agencies?
Well, obviously I have learned a lot, because my experience before working for them was mainly based on Spain, Europe, and Latin America, And this way I've been able to expand it to Africa and to Asia and to Central, South India, China, and so on and so on. So I got a wonderful experience. These multilaterals, we call them International Governmental Organization, IGOs, or multilaterals. The objective obviously is extremely good. The objective of helping all the countries to develop is a primary objective, and that's great. The issue is that the process of doing that, the procedure they apply mostly, is more on the tactics than in the strategy. And you don't develop by tactics. As I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, you don't develop by just making roads if you don't produce the industries that will need those roads to take the goods around. And you don't make development just by producing houses, because let's not forget, housing is a long-term consumption, is not a productive sector. It's a long-term, even if it has jobs creation and so on and so on, but you are consuming in the next 50 years, the time the house is worth, but it's not a productive sector. So you really must understand that development is a strategy that is blending all those things together, and not just doing tactical elements of doing roads or doing housing or doing green, sustainable, or doing just industry or doing, no, it has to be the blend. And this IGOs, these multilaterals, are not good at blending. You are promoted within the multilateral if you are in charge of a project which is making 3 schools in the mountains of Suriname, and then you achieve of doing those schools in budget and in time, and then you are a great guide and you are promoting to a higher job in these institutions. But you don't develop Suriname by doing 3 schools. You develop Suriname by doing schools and industry and roads and housing and environment and so on and so on. And those multilaterals are not good at blending all those things. That's why my job, the time I was in the World Bank, was mainly trying to explain to them the need for that kind of integration. And I even produced a methodology called brain shops. It's like workshops, but for metropolises. And we have done something like 15 brain shops around the world, and I'm now doing some of those in India with the European Union. But even if you blend in those brain shops all the elements, economic, social, governance, physical, with all the elements of physical and so on, even if you blend them, afterwards people think it's too much. They do not understand that that is the framework for the future, and they don't know how to pick up the projects that will blend that and will promote that development for the future. So it's very difficult to be able to achieve the collective intelligence that you need in the metropolis or in these countries to achieve development. And we have the tendency to do a piecemeal work of let's do a park here, let's do a highway there, let's do some housing, social housing over there. And they don't understand that the need of blending and coordinating all together, that's the only way of making sustainable, efficient, and equitable development for the future.
That makes so much sense. And yes, I've been thinking throughout my entire career and while going to grad school at NYU that, it is a holistic point of view, really, that, that's needed. So many moving pieces and, the proper attitude to work together is more urgent than ever.
Sometimes I say that it's like playing snooker. When you play snooker, you hit a ball and you must know how that ball is going to ricochet with other balls to get the objective you want. If you are not aware that there are other balls in the table and you just try to put your ball straight on the hole, that doesn't work, and you are going to make a mess out of your game. So planning and metropolitan management, like national, metropolises are not like cities. They are more like nations because of many things. And we don't have time to discuss that. So you have to think in a national process of the complexity of national politics to create that development. No? And that's what is missing in many of the metropolitan approaches around the world. No?
That makes sense. Now for the new generation in the field, what recommendation do you have for international consultants early in their careers?
Wow. Well, I remember when I was young, I was 20 or 21, I was going to go to England to do my postgraduate degree on town planning, and I went to see a very well-known urban planner in Madrid, no? And I told him that what was his advice, and he told me, don't do urban planning because they are never going to listen to you. It's going to be a life of frustration. So get into architecture, do something that you will be able to see at the end. The second personal anecdote is that I worked for the European Parliament for some time, for a year and a half, no? And I realized how long in those committees in the European Parliament took to decide and to discuss if a comma had to be before or after a word, no? They took a whole afternoon to decide if a comma should be after wheat or before wheat, you know? And I could not understand at the beginning, but then I realized that there are different scales of intervention in the world, no? And once you grow in scales, your intervention becomes blended with other people. If you're a painter and you have a piece of canvas and you are going to paint, you're almost free, no? Obviously, you're thinking about the market, the gallery guy that wants you to paint in that kind of approach and so on, but you're free in front of your square meter of paint canvas. When you're dealing with a house or a building, you're dealing either with the institution that has commissioned you the building or the family that has commissioned you the house. And you have to deal with the father, the mother, the children, and so on and so on. So you have to share your decision with the family, which is paying, and it's absolutely fair that you have to share the decision with them. When you are dealing with urban design, you have to deal with the community. And the community is a group of citizens that want the street in some way or another. So it's already 30 or 100 or 200 people. When you're dealing with urban planning, which is the next scale, which is the scale 1/5000, you are dealing with the municipality and the entrepreneurs and the social movements and so on. You are dealing with 5,000 people. When you are dealing with a metropolis, you are dealing with 1 million people. And when you're dealing with Europe, because I was working for the European Parliament, we were dealing with 400 million people. So your participation in something which is going to affect 400 million people might only be to have the comma on wheat before or after wheat. And that is very important because out of that comma, you will have the subsidies for a whole agricultural sector, or you won't have the subsidies. So many families are going to be affected by that comma before the wheat or after the wheat. So for my the young professionals that really want to get into metropolitan planning and management, that I am telling them they should, because they are needed. No, they're most in need. The world is most in need of people that will realize and know that. I will tell them that they must realize with humility that their intervention might just be some small ideas that might be huge in the long term, but maybe producing a train, producing a road, producing an airport, something that will shape the metropolis, because a metropolis is like a game of chess. Once you put the queen in the right strategic position, the game is almost over, because you are controlling the territory and you know where your pieces have to play. So their attitude is putting the queen in the right position. And if they achieve that, they have decided for the future of that metropolis for the next 500 years. Because obviously when Julius Caesar decided to put the bridge over the Thames at London, he was deciding the fate of London for 2,000 years, and so on and so on. So a small impact, a small comma in a metropolis, when you see that in the range of long-term impacts, is much more important than the beauty of a nice building in a corner of a street that in 80 years probably will be demolished. And that's my message for these guys. Realize that your impact will not be obvious, but your impact is going to be for 2,000 years and not just for a few photos in an architectural magazine.
That is incredible. Thank you for that. Now, talking a little bit about my motherland, Colombia. What do you think would be the biggest game changer to achieve progress in managing the growth of cities like Bogota, Medellin, or Cali?
Well, in Colombia, I have worked in Barranquilla, Cartagena, Bucaramanga, Cúcuta, Bogotá, Medellín, Buenaventura, and Cali. No, that is my experience in Colombia. No, and one of the problems in Colombia is that the municipalities have too much power and the departments have no power at all. Because in Colombia, they had that conflict at the beginning of the 19th century that you even called the Patria Boba or the Constitución Boba or something like that. That was a conflict between people that were for a federal system and others were for a unitary system. So in Colombia, it was decided that you will have a unitary system, all the power will be at the center, and there is a lot of fear of federalizing in Colombia and giving power to the regions because, for instance, in the Caribe region, they even had a referendum a few years ago that they wanted some kind of autonomy. No, so the effect of that on the Constitution of '91 was that the municipalities have a power. Obviously, all the power is in the center, and the departments do not have power. And when you're dealing with a metropolis, you are dealing with a set of municipalities. In the case of Bogota, I say it is the Sabana. The metropolis of Bogota is the Sabana, so it's 27 municipalities. And if there is not an element that will be able to organize them efficiently, they will not be able to organize them as a metropolis. And that could be the department, but the department does not have power. Does not have money, does not have power, so they cannot be the department. Now in Bogota, you are trying to create a new law because the constitution has been changed, and now you have the possibility to create a metropolis for Bogota that you did not have previous to the constitutional change. But I am afraid that you are taking the wrong direction because you are trying to create a metropolis as a confederation of municipalities, and that doesn't work. A confederation is a club. And in a club, if I don't feel that the club is doing what I want, I leave the club, no? And if the club charges me too much to make something, I will say, no, I leave the club, no? A confederation doesn't work for a metropolis. So a metropolis needs some kind of unitary government to be able to be governed. And that is the big challenge in Colombia. The fact that the constitution is a unitary constitution, they do not understand to have decentralized power in the metropolis, and the metropolis are not able to be run efficiently. The only one is Medellin, because in Medellin, they have been able to develop a negotiation, a coordination through dialogue, but that is not the case, for instance, in the Caribe, no, between Cartagena, Barranquilla, and Santa Marta. They should be a single metropolis with a train that will link the three of them, or in Bogota or in Cali and the Valle del Cauca. They have been discussing that for so many years and so on. So the first challenge is to understand that the metropolis needs a coordination body with the capacity in budget and in decision making. And then the second challenge is budget. The money in Colombia is in the hands of the national government mainly, no? Is not spread around, and so it should be the national government that should make the big infrastructures needed in those metropolises. Do remember that Bogota plus Medellin plus Barranquilla plus Cali, that's 80% of the GDP of Colombia. These four metropolises is 80% of all that Colombia produces. So if you want to be fair, and that will be economically efficient, but it will not be equitably fair, you should apply 80% of the national budget on those four metropolises. That's not fair. That's not equitable, because obviously the ones that do not have deserve to have as well, no? But imagine that if you share, depending on what you bring to the economy, that will be a market attitude, you should spend 80% of the national budget. So really those metropolises can only work if they have the big money of the nation to do what they need. And the nation doesn't want to do that. The nation says, mayors, get together around the table, discuss your issues, and find solutions that you will implement. And when 10 mayors talk about public transport, the final decision is that they are going to paint altogether the bus stops in green. But obviously that's not the solution a metropolis needs, no? And I am giving you an example of Guatemala. Guatemala, there were 12 mayors. At the end, the final decision is that they were going to paint the buses and the bus stops in the same color. That was the Metropolitan policy. And that's not the way of addressing the issues of metropolis. And if the metropolis of Colombia do not work, Colombia will not work. Because if you are not, and as a matter of fact, Colombia should be much better positioned in the world, but the mess of Bogota, the transport mess of Bogota makes Bogota inefficient, and that's why Colombia has not taken the role it should take in the world, and especially in coordinating Latin America, which is really a must for the future of the world, a coordination of Latin America. You see, any decision in a transport issue affects the geopolitical equilibrium of the world, and we must understand all those links to be able to manage the metropolis right.
That makes so much sense, and I truly appreciate that insight. There is so much uncertainty in Colombia, and definitely politicians are not helping. So I hope there is better days ahead of us, maybe with a new administration, or God help us on this one also.
In whatever country, in India, in Spain, in France, wherever, they love to criticize the politicians. But we must understand that we have voted those politicians there. No?
Yeah.
And those politicians are the reflection of the people that had voted them. And I don't want to go down that road.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, if the elections are fair. But yeah, that's another whole topic. I am truly grateful to you for joining us at Growing Cities Podcast, for sharing your valuable insight, and you're inspiring me in so many ways, and to our audience to think outside the box, to think on scale. And I truly look forward to continue watching the interesting work that you do to help grow cities sustainably across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Viviana. It's been a very pleasurable and a great conversation, and all the listeners as well. And I invite them to mail to me, and I am very open to discussion and to sharing and to answering all mails I will receive. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you again. Thank you for following us at growingcitiespodcast.com. Download these and other episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Play.